The first blow didn't land on my face. It landed in the dead center of a room filled with laughter, and it hit with the force of a physical punch. My chest seized up, a knot of ice and fire. It was my granddaughter Lily's 8th birthday party. The air was thick with the sweet smell of sugar frosting and the cheap, waxy scent of blown-out candles. Kids were running around, their shrieks of joy echoing off the high ceilings of my son Michael's meticulously modern home. A home I helped him buy. I'd spent 2 months in my workshop, my old gnarled hands working the stubborn grain of a piece of cherry wood. My wife, Sarah, before she passed, had loved the sound of a music box. I'd made one for her on our 25th anniversary. This one was for Lily. It was carved with little violets, her favorite flower, and when you opened the lid, a tiny ballerina twirled to the tune of Claire de Lune. It was a piece of my heart, a piece of her grandmother's memory, carved into wood. I waited until the chaos of presents died down. Lily was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a mountain of plastic and brightly colored paper. I knelt, my old knees protesting with a loud crack. "I have one more for you, sweetheart," I said, my voice a low rumble. I held out the box. Her eyes, the same deep brown as her grandmother's, lit up. She reached for it with sticky fingers. "Oh, Grandpa," she breathed, tracing the carved violets. She opened it, and the soft, tinkling melody filled the momentary lull. A genuine, unadulterated smile spread across her face. It was the only payment I've ever needed in my life. My heart felt so full it ached. I leaned in, my arms open, to give her a hug. A simple, grandfatherly hug. "Stay away from her." The voice was a whip crack. Sharp, cold, and utterly venomous. It was my daughter-in-law, Jessica. Every head in the room snapped toward her. The laughter died. The children froze. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the faint, innocent notes of the music box. My arms, which had been reaching for my granddaughter, fell to my sides, heavy as lead. My face burned, a hot flush of shame creeping up my neck. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes on me, judging me, dissecting my humiliation. Jessica stood in the archway to the kitchen, her arms crossed, her posture as rigid as a soldier's. Her face was a mask of contempt. Michael, my son, stood a few feet behind her, his gaze fixed on the floor, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He wouldn't look at me. My throat was bone dry. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak, disconnected from my brain. It was Lily who broke the spell. Her little voice, trembling but clear, cut through the tension. "But Mommy," she said, clutching the music box to her chest, "Grandpa just wanted—" Jessica took a sharp step forward, her eyes flashing. "Lily, not now. Go wash your hands." Her tone left no room for argument. Lily's face crumpled, her eyes welling with tears. She looked from her mother to me, a picture of confusion and hurt. Then she was gone, scurried away by her mother's icy command. The party was over. The warmth had been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum of cold, awkward silence. Jessica shot me one last look of pure loathing before turning on her heel and marching back into the kitchen. The other parents started gathering their children, muttering quiet, uncomfortable goodbyes, their eyes avoiding mine. I was left kneeling on the floor, a 72-year-old man, publicly shamed in his own son's home. Michael still wouldn't look at me. He just walked over and started cleaning up wrapping paper, his shoulders hunched. I finally pushed myself to my feet, my joints screaming in protest. The music box melody had stopped. All I could hear was the frantic, panicked thumping of my own heart. What had I done? What had I done to deserve this? Michael finally spoke, his voice so low I could barely hear it. "Dad, maybe it's time to go." He still wouldn't meet my eyes. He just handed me my coat, a silent, final dismissal. As I walked out the door into the cool evening air, I felt a piece of paper being pressed into my hand. I looked down. It was a note, scribbled in a child's unsteady hand. It was from Lily. I didn't read it until I was in my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unfold it. It had just 4 words, but they chilled me to the bone. She's looking in your room. The drive home was a blur of streetlights smearing across my windshield. Lily's note sat on the passenger seat, a small white square of dread. She's looking in your room. Which room? My room at their house, the guest room I sometimes stayed in, or my room at my own home? The word she could only mean one person, Jessica. My mind reeled, trying to connect her public hostility with this secret, invasive act. Why would she be going through my things? My house felt cold and unnervingly quiet when I arrived. I'd lived here for 45 years. I'd built the back deck with my own 2 hands. Sarah and I had painted every room, our laughter echoing in the empty spaces. Now, the silence felt accusatory. I walked through the familiar rooms, the weight of the day pressing down on my shoulders. I ran a hand along the worn armchair where Sarah used to read, the fabric smooth beneath my calloused fingers. Everything was exactly as I had left it, or so I thought. I went into my small home office, the one room that was purely mine. It smelled of old paper, wood polish, and the faint, lingering scent of my aftershave. But tonight, there was something else, a subtle, foreign fragrance hanging in the air. It was a floral perfume, Jessica's perfume. My blood ran cold. She had been here, in my house, in my private space. My gaze swept the room. The stack of bills on the corner of the desk seemed undisturbed. The family photos on the shelf were straight, but my old roll-top desk, it wasn't quite closed. I always locked it, a habit from my days as an accountant. Sarah used to tease me about it. I reached out a trembling hand and tested the lock. It was open. A wave of nausea washed over me. I slowly rolled back the wooden cover. Inside, my neat, orderly world was in subtle disarray. A ledger I used to track my pension and investments was slightly askew. A folder containing the deed to my house and my insurance policies had been moved from the left side to the right. My jaw clenched. This wasn't a casual snoop. This was a search. She had been looking for something specific. My heart hammered against my ribs. What was she after? I started pulling out files, my hands fumbling. I checked my bank statements, my investment portfolio, the title to my car. Everything seemed to be there. But the feeling of violation was a physical presence in the room, making it hard to breathe. It was an intimacy stolen, a trust shattered so completely I felt a tremor of rage run through me. Then I saw it. Tucked inside the folder with the house deed was another manila envelope I didn't recognize. It was newer than the others, the paper crisp and clean. My name, Arthur Miller, was typed on the front. There was no return address. My hands felt clumsy as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a carbon copy of a legal document. It was a standard power of attorney form. It granted the holder sweeping control over my finances, my property, my medical decisions, everything. At the bottom of the page were 2 signatures. One was a crisp, efficient scrawl I recognized as Jessica's. The other, on the line marked Granddaughte, was a shaky, almost illegible signature that was supposed to be mine. I stared at it, my vision blurring. I had never signed this paper. I had never seen it before in my life. It was a forgery. I sank into my worn leather chair, the paper crinkling in my white-knuckled grip. The perfume in the air was no longer just a scent, it was the smell of betrayal. They weren't just disrespecting me. They were trying to take control of my life, piece by piece, right under my nose. My son, Michael, had to know. He must have given her a key. The thought was a fresh stab of pain, deeper and more agonizing than the public humiliation. My eyes fell on a framed photo on my desk. It was of me, Michael, and Sarah, taken on a fishing trip years ago. We were all smiling. Michael, a young boy, holding up a tiny fish with immense pride. Where had that boy gone? How had he become a man who would stand by and watch his wife humiliate his father, a man who would let her into my home to steal my life from me? Suddenly a memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. About 6 months ago, Jessica had come over with a stack of papers. "Just some updates for your Medicare and supplemental insurance, Arthur," she'd said. her smile bright and reassuring. "Michael and I want to make sure you're taken care of." She'd pointed to several signature lines, and I, trusting her, had signed without reading the fine print. My chest tightened until I could barely draw a breath. How could I have been so foolish, so blind? I stood up, the forged document still in my hand. The quiet of my house was no longer peaceful. It was menacing. I was a prisoner in my own home, and the walls were closing in. I had to do something. I had to talk to Michael to confront him. But what would I even say? He had already chosen his side. As I stood there, lost in a storm of anger and grief, my phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen, expecting a call from a telemarketer or a wrong number. But it was a text message from an unknown number. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages as I tapped it open. The message contained only a single grainy image and a short line of text. The image was a screenshot of a bank transfer confirmation. A transfer of $10,000 from my savings account to an account I didn't recognize. The text below it read, "This is the first of many. You should see what she's planning next." The phone felt like a block of ice in my hand. $10,000. Gone. My eyes scanned the screenshot again, my mind struggling to process the information. The transfer was dated 2 weeks ago. The recipient account was simply listed as M&J Holdings LLC. Michael and Jessica. My savings, the money Sarah and I had painstakingly put away for decades, was being siphoned off. The anonymous text message wasn't a warning. It was a declaration of war. You should see what she's planning next. My first instinct was to call Michael, to scream, to demand, to beg for an explanation. But I stopped myself. My hand hovered over his contact photo, a picture of him and Lily at the zoo. If they were capable of forging a power of attorney and stealing my money, a direct confrontation would only make them more careful. They would deny everything, call me confused, old, senile. They were already laying the groundwork for that narrative. Jessica's outburst at the party wasn't just a moment of stress. It was a performance. It was designed to paint me as a problem, a burden. I took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to force the panic down. I had to be smart, smarter than them. I spent the next hour at my desk, my old accounting skills kicking in. I pulled up my online banking portal, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. There it was, the $10,000 transfer. But there was more. I scrolled back through the months. $5,000 here for home repairs. $7,000 there for investment services. A steady, methodical bleeding of my life savings, all authorized by the fraudulent power of attorney. It totaled nearly $50,000 over the last 6 months. My shoulders slumped. The sheer scale of the deception was staggering. Every polite visit, every offer to help with my confusing finances, every concerned look from Jessica was a lie. It was all a carefully constructed theater to mask their greed. I felt a profound sense of foolishness, a deep, burning shame that I had been so easily duped. They saw me not as a father, but as a resource to be drained. I needed more information. Who sent that text? Was it an ally, or someone trying to play their own game? And what was Jessica planning next? The words echoed in my head. I decided to start with the bank. The next morning I was waiting outside when the doors opened. I sat down with a young bank manager named Daniel, a man whose tie was knotted a little too tightly. I tried to keep my voice steady as I explained the situation. I showed him the transfers on my statement. "Mr. Miller," he said, typing furiously into his computer, his brow furrowed. "These transfers were all authorized online, using your credentials. But the initial power of attorney document that grants access, let me see. Yes, it was filed in person." "By whom?" I asked, my throat tight. He squinted at the screen. "It was filed by Michael Miller, your son. We have a copy of the document on file, notarized and everything." Notarized? The word hit me like a stone. That made it look official, legitimate. It meant this was even more premeditated than I had imagined. "I believe that document is a forgery," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "and I need to see all the paperwork associated with my accounts for the last year." Daniel's professional demeanor shifted to one of genuine concern. He looked at me, really looked at me, and I think he saw the desperation in my old eyes. He quietly excused himself and went into a back room. The minutes ticked by, each one an eternity. The squeak of the teller's chair, the low hum of the air conditioning, every sound was amplified. He returned with a thin file. "Legally, I can't give you the original POA since it's a legal filing, but I can show you our internal records. The notary public who stamped it is a woman named Rachel Peters." He pushed a form toward me. "We'd need you to file a fraud claim to investigate further." The name meant nothing to me, but it was a lead, a piece of the puzzle. I thanked Daniel, took the fraud claim forms, and walked out of the bank feeling like I was moving through deep water. The world seemed distant, muffled. Back in my car, I sat for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel. The betrayal felt like a physical illness, a poison spreading through my veins. I had to know more. I had to know how deep this went. With a surge of resolve, I picked up my phone. Not to call Michael, but to call the one person who might talk to me, the one person whose love I still believed in. I dialed the number for Michael's home. I prayed Jessica wouldn't answer. After 3 rings, a small voice picked up. "Hello?" It was Lily. "Lilybug, it's Grandpa," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Is your mom or dad around?" "No, Grandpa," she whispered, her voice conspiratorial. "Daddy's at work and Mommy is on a long phone call in the garden. She's yelling." A knot of apprehension formed in my stomach. "Oh? What's she yelling about, sweetheart?" There was a pause and I could hear her breathing, the sound of her moving the phone closer to her mouth. Her next words were so quiet I almost missed them, but they landed with the force of a thunderclap. "She's talking to a man," Lily whispered. "She keeps saying your name. She said, 'The old man is getting suspicious. We have to speed up the timeline for the house.'" The world tilted on its axis. "We have to speed up the timeline for the house." It wasn't just about my savings anymore. It was about my home. The 4 walls that held every memory of my life with Sarah. The garden we planted together. The notch on the kitchen doorframe marking Michael's height each year. They wanted to take it all, and Lily's words confirmed my deepest fear. Jessica wasn't acting alone. The man on the phone. Was it Michael? A lawyer? Someone else entirely? "Lily," I said, my voice strained, fighting to stay calm for her sake. "That's very interesting. Is she still on the phone?" "Yes," she whispered back. "She's walking by the roses. She looks mad." An idea, desperate and risky, formed in my mind. "Sweetheart, can you do something for me? It's very important, but only if you can do it without her seeing." "What is it, Grandpa?" "Can you get close enough to hear what she's saying? Maybe just a few words? A name?" I hated asking her to do this, to involve her in this ugliness, but I was drowning, and she was the only hand reaching out to me. I heard a soft shuffling sound as she moved with the phone. I held my breath, my knuckles white as I gripped my own phone. I could hear the faint sound of birds chirping on her end, then the muffled, angry cadence of Jessica's voice in the background. It was too indistinct to make out the words. "She's talking about papers," Lily whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She said, "Dr. Evans has the assessment ready. It says he's confused." She said the judge won't even question it. My blood turned to ice. Dr. Evans. Assessment. They were trying to have me declared incompetent. That was the plan. The public humiliation, the isolation, the gaslighting. It was all part of a strategy to build a case that I was losing my mind. They would use a doctor's fabricated report to get a court to grant them conservatorship. Then they would have total control. They could sell my house, liquidate my assets, and I'd be powerless to stop them. They could put me in a home. The thought sent a jolt of raw terror through me. "Thank you, Lilybug," I managed to say, my voice a dry rasp. You are a very brave girl. Now please, go back to your room and don't let your mom know you were on the phone. Okay, Grandpa. I love you. I love you too, sweetheart. More than you know. I hung up, my mind racing. Dr. Evans. I didn't know any Dr. Evans. I had been seeing the same family doctor, Dr. Peterson, for 30 years. This was a hired gun, a doctor willing to write a fraudulent assessment for a price. And the notary, Rachel Peters. Were they connected? I drove home on autopilot, my thoughts a maelstrom of fear and fury. The anonymous texter, the forged POA, the stolen money, the plan for my house, and now a conspiracy to have me declared mentally unfit. It was a monstrous, cold-blooded plan, and my son was a part of it. The pain of that realization was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. Back in my office, I felt a new sense of urgency. I was no longer just a victim. I was a man fighting for his life, for his very identity. I pulled out the local phone book, a relic, I know, but I still trusted paper over the internet, and looked up notaries. There were dozens. But then I cross-referenced the name Rachel Peters with a search for medical offices. And there it was, a hit. Rachel Peters was listed as the office manager and in-house notary for a geriatric specialist named Dr. Mark Evans. His office was on the other side of town in a new, sterile-looking medical complex. It was all connected. The notary who validated my forged signature worked for the doctor who was going to declare me incompetent. This was a well-oiled machine designed to prey on the elderly. Jessica hadn't just come up with this on her own. She'd found professionals willing to help her. My hand trembled as I gripped the edge of my desk. They had laid a perfect trap. Any attempt I made to fight back would be used as further evidence of my confusion and paranoia. They had thought of everything, but they hadn't thought of Lily. They hadn't thought of the anonymous texter, and they hadn't thought that this confused old man still had a fire in his belly. I sat there for a long time, the silence of the house pressing in on me. I knew what I had to do next. It was a long shot, a gamble that could backfire spectacularly. But I had to see the belly of the beast for myself. I needed to see this Dr. Evans, and I needed to find a way into his office. I needed proof. My phone buzzed again. It was the same unknown number. This time there was no image, just a few lines of text that made my heart stop. They keep the original client files in a locked cabinet in the back office. The key is in the top left drawer of the receptionist's desk. Her name is Amanda. She leaves for lunch at exactly 12:30 p.m. You have 15 minutes. Be careful. This is the last time I can help you. The message was a blueprint for a crime. My crime. For a moment I felt a paralyzing fear. I was a retired accountant. I'd spent my life balancing ledgers and following rules. Now, a stranger was telling me to break into a doctor's office and steal a file. It was insane. It was reckless. It was the only chance I had. Who was this person? A disgruntled employee at the doctor's office? A former victim? I had no way of knowing, but their information had been deadly accurate so far. This is the last time I can help you. The finality of that sentence spurred me into action. This was my one shot. The next day I dressed in my Sunday best, a simple pair of slacks, a pressed shirt, and a sports coat. I wanted to look respectable, harmless, invisible. I drove to the medical complex, my stomach churning with a mixture of terror and adrenaline. I parked a short distance away and watched the entrance to Dr. Evans' clinic. It was a modern, glass-fronted building that felt cold and impersonal. At 12:20 p.m. I walked in. The waiting room was empty, save for a young receptionist with blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. A small plaque on her desk read, "Amanda." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was all real. "Good afternoon," I said, leaning on the counter, trying to project an air of gentle confusion. "I'm here to see Dr. Evans. My daughter, Jessica Miller, was supposed to make an appointment for me. Arthur Miller." Amanda typed my name into her computer. Her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, sir, I don't have an appointment for you today." "Oh dear." I said, feigning disappointment. "She does get so forgetful. Could you possibly check for next week? I'll just sit down for a moment and catch my breath. The walk from the car park is longer than it looks." She gave me a sympathetic, slightly dismissive smile and turned back to her screen. I shuffled over to a chair that gave me a clear view of her desk. My eyes were fixed on the top left drawer. The key. It was right there. I watched the clock on the wall. 12:25. 5 more minutes. My hands were clammy and I gripped the armrests of the chair to keep them from shaking. My whole body felt like a tightly coiled spring. At exactly 12:30, Amanda stood up, grabbed her purse from under the desk and gave me another polite smile. "I'll be back in a bit, sir. I'll check on that appointment for you then." "Thank you, my dear," I said, my voice hoarse. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, I was on my feet. I moved faster than I had in years, my joints protesting as I scurried behind the reception desk. My breath came in short, sharp gasps. My fingers fumbled with the handle of the top left drawer. It slid open with a soft metallic whisper, and there it was, a small single key on a plain silver ring. I grabbed it and hurried down a short hallway, my heart pounding in my ears. The door to the back office was unlocked. Inside, the room was lined with gray metal filing cabinets. One of them had a prominent lock on it. It had to be the one. The key slid into the lock and turned with a satisfying click. I pulled open the drawer. It was filled with patient files, organized alphabetically. I ran my finger along the tabs. M. Meyer. Miller. There it was. A thick manila folder with my name, Arthur Miller, typed on the label. My hands were trembling so violently I almost dropped it. I opened it on a small desk in the corner. The top document was the assessment Lily had mentioned. It was signed by Dr. Mark Evans. I scanned the pages, my vision blurring with rage. It was a complete work of fiction. Patient presence with significant memory loss. Exhibits signs of paranoia and delusional thinking. Unable to manage his own financial affairs. It was a character assassination, a medical document designed to strip me of my dignity and my freedom. Beneath the assessment was a copy of the forged power of attorney. And behind that, something even more damning. It was an invoice from Dr. Evans' office, addressed to M&J Holdings LLC. The company Michael and Jessica had been wiring my money to. The invoice was for consultation and geriatric assessment services. The amount was $25,000. Half of the money they had stolen from me was payment for this fraudulent medical report. It was the smoking gun. This was proof of a conspiracy, clear and undeniable. I pulled out my phone and with shaking hands took pictures of every single page. The assessment, the invoice, the POA. Each click of the camera's shutter felt like a small victory, a piece of my life I was taking back. I had just finished photographing the last page when I heard a sound in the hallway. The front door of the clinic opening. My blood ran cold. Amanda was back early. I shoved the file back into the cabinet, locked it, and flew back to the receptionist's desk. I slid the drawer shut, just as her shadow fell across the doorway. My hand, still holding the key, was frozen in mid-air. I had run out of time. She stopped dead, her eyes widening as she saw me behind her desk. A small gasp escaped her lips. We stared at each other for a heart-stopping second. She wasn't just surprised, she looked terrified. And in her eyes, I saw something that wasn't just the look of a startled employee. It was a look of recognition and of guilt. She opened her mouth to scream, but before she could, my phone sitting on the counter buzzed loudly. The screen lit up. It was another text from the unknown number, but this time, her eyes landed on it too. Her face went pale as a sheet. The message on the screen read, "Amanda, don't say a word. I know you helped them. I have the proof." The silence in the office was absolute. Amanda's mouth was still open, but no sound came out. Her eyes were wide with panic, darting from my face to the phone screen and back again. The anonymous message had hit its mark. She wasn't just a receptionist, she was a conspirator. My mind was racing, I had the key in my hand, my phone with its damning message on the counter, and a terrified young woman in front of me. I had to play this perfectly. "Amanda," I said, my voice low and steady, surprising even myself. I held up the key. "I believe this belongs to you." She flinched as if the key were a weapon. She swallowed hard, her Adam's apple bobbing in her throat. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, but her voice lacked any conviction. "I think you do," I continued, placing the key gently on the counter between us. "I think you know all about Dr. Evans's special assessments. I think you know about the invoices sent to shell companies, and I know that you witnessed the signature on a power of attorney that you knew was a forgery." Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. Her carefully constructed composure crumbled completely. "They made me do it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Jessica, she said she had a friend at the nursing board. She said she could ruin my chances of getting my nursing license. She said she'd say I was stealing medication. I'm still paying off my student loans. I couldn't risk it." The confession tumbled out of her in a torrent of sobs and half-finished sentences. Jessica had approached her months ago, complimenting her, befriending her, and then slowly, expertly, laying her trap. She had offered Amanda money, $1,000, to look the other way when the fraudulent POA was notarized by Rachel Peters, the office manager. Dr. Evans, it turned out, was neck-deep in debt from a bad real estate investment. He had a side business providing these fabricated assessments for families looking to seize control of an elderly relative's assets. Jessica had found the perfect network of criminals hiding in plain sight. "Who sent you those messages?" she asked, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "I don't know," I said honestly. "But whoever it is, they're looking out for me. And maybe for you too." A spark of defiance flickered in her tear-filled eyes. "Jessica, she's a monster," she bragged about it. "She said you were a doting old fool who wouldn't know what hit him until he was in a state-run nursing home, and she was redecorating your house." The words were like acid. A doting old fool. The cruelty was breathtaking. The evidence on my phone was damning, but this was the emotional proof of their malice. "Amanda," I said, my tone softening slightly. "I wasn't her enemy. Jessica was. I am not here to hurt you, but I am going to stop them, and I need your help. I need a sworn statement. I need you to tell a lawyer everything you just told me." She hesitated, chewing on her lower lip. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Anger. The anger of being used and threatened. "What if he fires me?" she whispered. "What if Jessica follows through on her threats? What if he goes to prison, and you go with him?" I countered gently. "I am giving you a way out. Help me, and I promise I will have my lawyer ensure you are protected as a witness. You can be the person who helps stop this from happening to someone else." I saw the internal battle play out on her face, the choice between self-preservation and doing the right thing. It felt like an eternity before she finally gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Okay," she said, her voice small but firm. "Okay, I'll do it." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I had my evidence. I had my witness. The tide was turning. I gave her the number for a lawyer, a man I was planning to call myself as soon as I left. An old friend's son, David, who specialized in elder law. I walked out of that clinic feeling 10 years younger. The weight on my shoulders hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It was no longer the dead weight of despair, but the heavy, solid weight of purpose. I had been humiliated, betrayed, and nearly erased. But I was still here. I was still fighting. As I got into my car, my phone buzzed one last time. It was the unknown number again. I opened it, expecting another piece of intel, another warning. But this message was different. It was a single photo. A picture of the little wooden music box I had given Lily, sitting on her nightstand. Next to it was a small framed photo of me and her grandmother Sarah. Below the photo, a final line of text. "She loves the music box, Grandpa. She plays it every night. Don't let them win. My eyes burned with tears. It was Lily. It had to be. She must have been using a texting app on her tablet. This whole time, my brave 8-year-old granddaughter had been my guardian angel. She was the one who had seen Amanda's name on paperwork, who had overheard conversations, who had pieced together this ugly puzzle in a way no one else could. She was fighting for me too, and I would not let her down. I wiped my eyes, put the car in drive, and headed for the one place that could give me the power to end this. It was time to see a lawyer. I had the evidence. I had a witness. Now, I needed a weapon. And as I drove, I realized I already knew what it had to be. It wasn't just about reclaiming my money or my house. It was about reclaiming my future and protecting hers. David, the lawyer, was about to hear a story that would make his hair stand on end. But he wasn't just going to hear a story of victimhood. He was going to hear my plan for the countermove. When I arrived at his office, David listened intently, his expression growing more grave with each detail. After I finished, he was silent for a long moment. Then he looked at me, a grim smile on his face. "Arthur," he said, leaning forward, "they've made a terrible mistake. They think they're just dealing with a confused old man. They have no idea who they're messing with. But before we discuss legal action, there's something else. When I was handling your wife's estate, she had me include a very specific, very unusual clause in the deed to your house. I think you need to see it." David slid a thick, blue-bordered document across the polished mahogany of his desk. It was a copy of the deed to my house. My hands, which had been so unsteady for the past few days, were now surprisingly firm as I picked it up. My eyes scanned the familiar legal jargon until David pointed to a specific paragraph halfway down the page. "Read this part, Arthur." Sarah was very insistent on it. I put on my reading glasses and leaned closer. The text was dense, but the meaning was crystal clear. It was a survivorship clause with a highly specific condition. It stated that I, Arthur Miller, had sole ownership and right of residence for the duration of my natural life. Upon my passing, the house would pass to my son, Michael. But, and this was the part that made my breath catch in my throat, if at any point the property was sold or transferred while Michael was married to Jessica Collins Miller, 1/2 of the net proceeds were to be immediately placed into an irrevocable trust for the sole benefit of our granddaughter, Lily Miller. The trust would be inaccessible to anyone, including her parents, until her 25th birthday. A slow smile spread across my face. It was Sarah, my brilliant, wonderful Sarah. It was as if she had seen this coming from beyond the grave. She had never fully trusted Jessica. I remembered her quiet observations, the way she would watch Jessica when she thought no one was looking. "She looks at things, Arthur," Sarah once told me, "not with appreciation, but with appraisal." I had dismissed it as her being overly protective. But she had been right. She had forged one last shield to protect her family. This clause didn't stop them from inheriting eventually, but it completely dismantled their immediate plan. Their scheme was to get control, sell the house, and use the money for their own lavish lifestyle. Sarah's clause turned their golden goose into a nest egg for the very person they were using as a pawn. It rendered their entire plot financially pointless, at least in the short term. This is incredible," I murmured, tracing the words with my finger. It was a love letter from the past, a final act of protection. "It gets better," David said, leaning back in his chair. "The way she structured it with the family trust. They can't force a sale through a conservatorship, even if they were to get one. You, as the trustee, are the only one who can authorize a sale. They can't touch the house, Arthur. Not while you're alive, and of sound mind. And with our witness and their documented fraud, we can prove you are very much of sound mind." For the first time in weeks, I felt the crushing weight on my chest begin to lift. I wasn't just defending. I was on the attack. Hope, fierce and bright, surged through me. "So what's our next move?" I asked, my voice filled with a newfound strength. "We have a few options," David explained, ticking them off on his fingers. We can go to the police and the district attorney with the fraud and conspiracy charges. They would almost certainly face jail time. We can file a civil suit to recover the money they've stolen and sue for damages. Or we can handle this another way, a more personal way. I thought about Michael, my son. Despite the depth of his betrayal, the thought of him in a prison cell sent a pang of sorrow through me. He was weak, easily manipulated by a venomous woman, but he was still my son. And I thought about Lily. What would it do to her to see her parents arrested, her family destroyed by a public scandal? No, I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice. And more than that, I wanted peace. I wanted to reclaim my dignity, not destroy what was left of my family. I don't want to send my son to jail, I said quietly, and I don't want Lily to grow up visiting her father behind bars. There has to be another way. David nodded slowly, a look of respect in his eyes. I thought you might say that, so I've taken the liberty of drafting a counter-offensive. It's a bit unorthodox, but I think it achieves your goals. He slid another set of documents across the table. This was not a lawsuit. It was a comprehensive settlement agreement. First, it was a legal revocation of the fraudulent power of attorney, complete with a cease and desist order, preventing them from accessing any more of my accounts. Second, it was a full restructuring of my will and estate. My house, my investments, my savings, everything was to be placed into a new ironclad trust. I would be the sole beneficiary for my lifetime. Upon my death, the trust would be managed by an independent, court-appointed executor. Michael and Jessica were explicitly disinherited. The entire estate would go to Lily, managed for her until she turned 30. Third, and this was the master stroke, it included a confession and a repayment plan. It required both Michael and Jessica to sign a document admitting to the fraudulent POA and the misappropriation of funds. It then stipulated a schedule for them to repay every single dollar they had stolen, with interest. If they sign this, David said, they avoid criminal charges. They walk away with nothing but the debt they owe you. If they refuse to sign, then this all goes to the district attorney tomorrow morning. It was a checkmate. It gave them a choice, public ruin and possible prison time, or private disgrace and accountability. It protected my assets, secured Lily's future, and offered my son a long, hard road to redemption if he chose to take it. There's one more thing, I said, my voice hard. I want to add a clause, a condition for the meeting where we present this. David raised an eyebrow. What is it? I want it to happen at my house, I said, in my living room, and I want Lily to be there. I want her to see her grandfather take his life back. David was silent for a moment, considering it. That's a bold move, Arthur. It could be emotionally intense for a child. She's been a part of this from the beginning, I replied firmly. She deserves to see how it ends. She needs to see that truth wins, that you don't let bullies win. He finally nodded. All right, Arthur. We'll do it your way. He picked up the phone to schedule the meeting. As he spoke to Michael's assistant, my mind was already in that living room. I could picture the scene, the confrontation that was to come. I felt no fear, only a cold, calm resolve. The doting old fool was about to show his teeth. I went home and waited. The 2 days before the meeting were the longest of my life. I cleaned the house. I polished the silver. I made sure the photo of Sarah on the mantelpiece was gleaming. I was preparing my home not as a battlefield, but as a courtroom. And I would be the judge. The evening of the meeting, the doorbell rang at precisely 7 o'clock. I opened the door, and there they were. Michael, his face pale and drawn. Jessica, her expression a mask of defiant arrogance. And Lily, standing slightly behind them, her small hand clutching her father's. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. David was already there, sitting quietly in an armchair. I led them into the living room. Jessica immediately took in the scene, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the lawyer. "What is this, Arthur?" she demanded, her voice dripping with disdain. An ambush? I didn't answer her. Instead, I looked directly at my son. Michael, I said, my voice clear and strong, resonating in the quiet room. Sit down. We have a great deal to discuss. He hesitated, looking at his wife. For a second, I saw the scared little boy I once knew. Then, he broke her gaze and slowly, deliberately, walked over to the sofa and sat down. It was the first small crack in her wall of control. The confrontation had begun. The air in the living room was so thick with tension I could feel it pressing on my skin. Jessica remained standing, her arms crossed, a sneer playing on her lips. She was trying to project power, but I could see a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Michael sat hunched on the sofa, refusing to look at anyone. Lily stood near the doorway, a silent observer, her gaze fixed on me. I gave her a small, reassuring nod. David cleared his throat, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. Thank you all for coming. We've called this meeting to discuss some serious financial and legal discrepancies that have recently come to Mr. Miller's attention. Oh, please, Jessica scoffed, rolling her eyes. If this is about Arthur being confused about his bills again, we can handle it. You don't need to be here, she said, waving a dismissive hand at David. My father is not confused, Michael mumbled, his voice so quiet it was almost lost. Jessica's head snapped toward him. What did you say? I said, he's not confused, Michael repeated, this time louder. He finally looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and filled with a miserable cocktail of guilt and fear. Jessica, just let them talk. Her face hardened, but she fell silent, turning her glare on me. I decided to start with the heart of it. On the day of Lily's birthday party, I began, my voice even. You publicly humiliated me, Jessica. You shouted at me to stay away from my own granddaughter. For weeks, I've been asking myself why. Why such cruelty? And I've come to realize it wasn't about stress or a bad day. It was a strategy. It was the beginning of a campaign to paint me as unstable. A prelude to having me declared incompetent. Jessica let out a sharp, derisive laugh. This is ridiculous. You're paranoid, Arthur. You need help. Is that what Dr. Evans was going to say in his official assessment? David interjected smoothly. He placed a folder on the coffee table but didn't open it. The assessment that you and your husband paid $25,000 for, using money taken from Arthur's savings account. The color drained from Jessica's face. Michael flinched as if he'd been struck. I have no idea what you're talking about, Jessica snapped, but the bravado was gone, replaced by a high-pitched defensiveness. Then perhaps you can explain this, I said. I took out my phone and swiped through the photos I had taken in Dr. Evans' office. I turned the screen towards them. The image was of the invoice from Dr. Evans to M&J Holdings, LLC. This is your company, isn't it? The one you've been funneling my money into? Michael buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Jessica stared at the phone, speechless. And this, I continued, swiping to the next photo, is the fraudulent power of attorney which grants you total control over my life. A document I never knowingly signed. A document that was notarized by Rachel Peters, who works for Dr. Evans, and witnessed by your receptionist Amanda, who has provided us with a sworn statement detailing your threats to her. With each new piece of evidence, Jessica's composure crumbled further. Her mask of arrogance was gone, revealing the raw, ugly greed beneath. Amanda is a lying, incompetent child, she shrieked. She'll say anything. Will she? David asked calmly. Because her story corroborates the bank records, the invoice, and the text messages. A district attorney would find it very compelling. It paints a very clear picture of conspiracy, fraud, and elder abuse. The words elder abuse and district attorney hung in the air like a death sentence. Michael began to openly weep, his sobs ragged and pathetic. You did this, Jessica hissed, turning on him. You were supposed to handle the bank transfers. You were supposed to make sure everything was clean. You weak, useless man. I told you it was wrong, Michael shot back, his voice choked with tears. I told you he would find out, but you wouldn't listen. You said he was just a senile old man. You said we deserved it. The ugly truth of their partnership was laid bare for all of us, including their daughter, to see. Lily stood frozen, her face pale, watching her parents implode. My heart ached for her, but she needed to see this. She needed to see the consequences of their choices. I held up a hand and the room fell silent again. Enough, I said, my voice resonating with an authority they had not heard in years. The damage is done. The only question now is what happens next. David opened the folder on the coffee table. You have two options, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion. He slid the settlement agreement across the table. Option 1. You sign this document. It contains a full confession, a legally binding agreement to repay every cent you stole, and a complete restructuring of Arthur's estate, which disinherits you both. You walk away with nothing but your debt. In exchange, we will not pursue criminal charges. He paused, letting the words sink in. Option 2. You refuse to sign. In which case, this entire file, including Amanda's testimony, will be on the desk of the Assistant District Attorney at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. And you, he said, looking directly at Jessica, will likely be facing a prison sentence of 5 to 7 years. Jessica stared at the papers as if they were a viper. Her mind was clearly working, calculating angles, searching for an escape route where there was none. I could see the war within her, her pride against her fear of prison. Michael didn't even hesitate. He reached out a trembling hand. "Give it to me," he whispered. "I'll sign it." "Don't you dare!" Jessica snarled, smacking his hand away. "Don't you dare let him win." "Win?" I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Jessica, look around you. There are no winners here, just a family that has been shattered by your greed." I looked at Lily, who was now crying silently, her small body shaking. That was the moment, the final piece of my plan. I had one more condition, one that wasn't written on any legal document. "Before you make your choice," I said, my eyes locked on Jessica, "there is something else. Sarah, my late wife, was a very smart woman. She saw something in you, Jessica, that I was too blind to see, and she took steps to protect this family, to protect her legacy." I gestured for David to hand me the copy of the house deed. I held it up. She added a clause, a little gift from beyond the grave, and it changes everything. I let the silence stretch, allowing the weight of my words to settle in the room. Jessica's eyes, narrowed with suspicion, were fixed on the deed in my hand. Michael looked up, a flicker of confusion breaking through his despair. "Your entire plan hinged on selling this house," I stated, my voice ringing with clarity. "You bled my savings to pay for the tools to take everything else, but you never bothered to read the fine print." I read Sarah's clause aloud, my voice steady and strong. I explained how half of any sale proceeds would be locked in a trust for Lily until she was 25, and how the house itself was protected within a trust that only I could control. "You cannot force me out. You cannot force a sale. This house, this legacy, is untouchable. Your entire scheme, all the lies, the cruelty, the risk you took, it was all for nothing." The finality of it hit Jessica like a physical blow. Her face, already pale, turned ashen. The fight drained out of her in an instant, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. All her intricate, malicious planning had been undone years ago by a woman whose memory she had disrespected. It was a perfect, poetic checkmate from my Sarah. "Now," I said, placing the deed back on the table next to the settlement agreement, "you have your choice, ruin or repayment." Michael reached for the pen again, and this time Jessica didn't stop him. He signed the confession and the agreement without reading it. His signature a messy, desperate scrawl. He pushed the papers toward his wife. She stared at the signature line for a long, agonizing minute. Her dreams of a lavish life, funded by my life's work, had evaporated. All that was left was the stark reality of prison or penance. With a choked, bitter sob, she snatched the pen and signed her name. It was done. David gathered the documents, gave me a solemn nod, and saw himself out. The legal part was over. Now, only the human part remained. Jessica stood up, her face a mask of cold fury. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at her husband. She walked to the door, opened it, and left without a word, slamming it behind her. The sound echoed the shattering of our family. Michael remained on the sofa, a broken man. He was still my son. I walked over and sat in the armchair opposite him. I loved her, he whispered to the floor. I thought I was making her happy. I just went along. And then it was too late. I was too weak, Dad. Too much of a coward. Yes, you were, I said, not unkindly. But what you do now, Michael, will define whether you stay a coward. You have a daughter in that doorway who has seen more ugliness tonight than any child should. Your path back starts with her, and it starts with repaying every dollar, not just to me, but to your own self-respect. He nodded, fresh tears streaming down his face. I then turned my attention to Lily, who was still standing by the door, looking small and lost. I opened my arms. Come here, Lilybug. She ran to me then, burying her face in my chest, her small body racked with sobs. I held her tight, stroking her hair, letting her cry it all out. I was her harbor now. I was her safety. You were so brave, I whispered into her hair. Your grandmother would be so proud of you. You saved me. You know that? She looked up, her face tear-streaked. The music box, she sniffled. Mommy wanted to throw it away. She said it was old junk. I hid it. My heart ached. It's not junk, sweetheart. It's a promise. A promise that there will always be beauty and love in the world, even when things seem dark. In the end, my justice was quiet. Michael moved out a week later. He took a small apartment and a second job, and the first repayment check arrived a month after that, as promised. He and Lily come over every Sunday. We don't talk about what happened. Instead, we work in the garden. We are slowly, carefully replanting what was destroyed. His road to earning back my trust will be long, but for Lily's sake, I am leaving the gate open for him. Jessica, I am told, moved out of state. I have no desire to know where she went. Her punishment is to live with the hollowness of her own choices. The real twist, the real poetic justice, wasn't financial. It was the quiet truth that had been there all along. In their attempt to steal my legacy, they had only succeeded in cementing it. They had revealed the strength I didn't know I had, and they had forged an unbreakable bond between me and my granddaughter. This house is no longer just a collection of memories. It is a sanctuary, protected by a wife's foresight and saved by a child's courage. I have my peace. I have my dignity. And every evening, as the sun sets, the faint tinkling notes of Clair de Lune drift from Lily's room, a sweet, clear melody that reminds me that the best parts of our lives, love, integrity, and courage, can never truly be stolen. They can only be given away. And mine, I intend to keep.